Hello there, fellow cultists. This is DM Nell, and I'm back with another episode of Shadow Talk, and I am on episode 103. And today I'm going to catch you up on my campaign, my personal campaign, my home group that plays every Tuesday night. So before we do that, I do want to just give you a little bit of information for those of you that play on a virtual tabletop. I also produce tokens for virtual tabletops, and with an eye to Shadow the Demon Lord. Shadow the Demon Lord has a lot of monsters and types of creatures that you don't find in other tabletop role-playing games, and therefore you will not find tokens to represent those types of creatures. So what I have done is created a number of tokens that are specific to Shadow the Demon Lord. They can also be used in other games to represent strange creatures, but they are most definitely modeled after Shadow the Demon Lord creatures. And so I wanted to let you know that these are available on the D20 or Roll20 marketplace. So if you go to the marketplace and just hit browse and come down here and type in DM Nell, you will find all of my token sets. So there are 8 of them altogether. And as you can see here, you have things such as the Muttering Maw. You have the Ghastly Chorus. You have a Reen over here. You have a Bloody Bones. You have a Harvester. You have the demon from the cover of Occult Philosophy right there. You know, what kind of demon is it? I don't know. Make it up. You have the demon from the core rulebook. The ogre, I should say the horned ogre from the cover of the core rulebook right there. From Feast of the Father, you have the worm thing. That adventure right there. What else we have here? Of course, I threw in some other fun stuff like Venger, the Cat Lord from Greyhawk. This dude here from Jeepers Creepers. And of course, there's the Emperor from Star Wars, because why not? But then we have, let's see, what else we have here? We have, of course, something that could be a beholder. We have dragon. We've got a gibbering mouther. We have an alien, a xenomorph. Earth elemental, shark dude, shark, half shark man. We got a mermaid, creepy mermaid, and we got Mumra right here, of course. So yeah, we have lots of Shadow Demon Lord specific and a few things that are not specific to Shadow the Demon Lord in here as well. So those are just some examples. Freddy Krueger's up here. Yeah. Those are some examples of some tokens that have been created for the game and just some random other ones. So, if you are a virtual tabletop DM and you would like to incorporate some tokens that fit your game, your Shadow the Demon Lord game, then come to the Roll20 marketplace and purchase one. And you can download these so that even if you don't use Roll20, use a different virtual tabletop, you can save these and import them into whatever virtual tabletop that you prefer. Okay, so anyway, having said that, let's go ahead and move on to today's topic. So in order to do that, I need to go to my Roll20 game, because I played my latest campaign in Roll20, and the reason for that is because there's a couple of reasons. First of all, one of my players was having difficulty with the previous virtual tabletop that I was running in, which is Foundry. And so his internet service wasn't handling it very well. It was very laggy. But he could play in Roll20 without any problem. So that's the primary reason that I moved it over to Roll20. But there were also some things happening in Foundry, some upgrades that were causing some errors in my campaign there that I hadn't been able to figure out. So that was definitely putting a hamper into my ability to run a game in Foundry. I have yet to fix that, so hopefully for my next campaign I will have resolved that issue and have the choice of whether or not to continue in Roll20, or to go to Foundry, or to try out a new one, such as Fantasy Grounds. Fantasy Grounds is really the only virtual tabletop that has what I would consider the blessing of Schwab Entertainment, in that it has the full rule set for Shadow of the Demon Lord, plus it has a bunch of monsters loaded in there, a bunch of character options that you can just drag and drop and into your characters, which makes it super easy for your players and for your DM. But that's in Fantasy Grounds, and I'm not familiar with Fantasy Grounds. Although I do own it, I have never run a game in it, and I've never played in it. So between now and when I start my next campaign, which is going to be a little bit down the road, because my buddy is running a campaign in Dungeon Crawl Classics next, and so I get to take a break and be a player. So yeah, but when I do crank up my next Shadow of the Demon Lord campaign, I'll have my my choice of which virtual tabletop I would like to run in. All right, so let's go ahead and jump in here. So when we last left off, the characters had just finished out the expert tier. And so the storyline so far is that they, at the beginning of their careers, they witnessed or they became involved and helped stopping a cult that was trying to gain the attention of a celestial, a sentient celestial object known as a Tropos. And this cult managed to use an ancient astrological site to project a beacon to that celestial object, thus drawing its attention to Earth. They did stop the cult, but not before the cult was able to get that beacon sent off. And so the attention of Atropos was made, or was gained. And so Atropos at that point started moving towards Earth. And another thing that happened is that a mysterious meteor shower fell down on their village of Starfall, and these meteors caused the people of Starfall to mutate. So this has been something that has been going on throughout the campaign, and intensified towards the end of the campaign, because these meteors are coming from Atropos and are a foreshadowing of what can happen when Atropos arrives. And so this was the impetus for the characters to adventure and try to find a way to stop Atropos from reaching the Earth, or reaching Earth. And so I already covered the novice and the expert tier and what they went through, all the shenanigans they went through for that. So when we left off, we were in the city of Wonders, which is Lidge over here on the Confederacy of 9 Cities, and they had learned that they need to find the evil book known as the what the hell is it? The manuscript of the Black Sun, or the Black Sun manuscript, which is in the possession of a cult by the name of the Black Sun Dawn. They knew this already, but they didn't know where to find the Black Sun Dawn or the manuscript. So they spent time in Lidge gathering that information, and they learned that the location of the Black Sun Dawn's headquarters would be down here. And yes, that is a phallus that one of my players drew on my map. Yeah, that's just how my players roll. Anyway, down here is where the headquarters of, or the tower known as the Occlusion, which is the headquarters of the Black Sun Dawn, and that's where they can find the manuscript. So they had to find a way to get from Lidge down to the Patchwork Lands to find the Occlusion. And I wanted to put a time limit on this because we're in the master tier, and I wanted to kind of move it along. I wanted to get a sense of urgency that Earth is approaching, and that they have a limited amount of time in order to find the book and build the weapon that they need in order to defeat Atropos. So they had, of course, the choice of hiring a ship to travel all the way down the coast, probably hitting various cities on the way, and then making their way around down to a port somewhere down here in the Patchwork Lands, and then taking a caravan or hiring a guide to lead them to the appropriate place in the Patchwork Lands. That would have been the non-time sensitive option. But since I told them that they had a limited amount of time before Atropos arrived, I wanted to get of urgency going. So I told them that even though they know the current location of the occlusion, that the occlusion has magic that causes it to disappear and reappear in a random location, kind of like that tower in Krull, that horrible 80s movie. And so they only had a month to get to the Patchwork Lands and find the occlusion where it is currently located. And at the end of that month, it would disappear and it would randomly appear somewhere else within the Patchwork Lands. And they would have to start all over again to try to figure out where in the Patchwork Lands the occlusion is, which they don't have time for. So this gave them a sense of urgency. So what they ended up doing was using one of their contacts that they had made with the person known as Parzu. Now they met Parzu in the former lair of the Black Sun Dawn that was in the ruined mansion of Rathrin Crux, which is located in Lidge. So in the I think it was a 6th level adventure, they went through that dungeon, and they met Parzu, who is master of the 7 doors. So being master of the 7 doors, Parzu was somebody that could quickly transport them to the Patchwork Lands or somewhere nearby. And so I said, this was an opportunity for me to stretch my creative brain a little bit. And so Parzu, master of the 7 doors, wasn't really fleshed out. He was mentioned by name in the Black Sun Dawn manuscript as one of the people that had tried to hunt down the Black Sun Dawn. And so I included him in that last adventure. But then when the characters needed a quick means of transporting to the Patchwork Lands, I decided that he could be a resource for them because he's master of the 7 doors. Well, what are the 7 doors? Obviously, in my brain anyway, the 7 doors are permanent portals that lead to specific places on Earth. So since he's master of the 7 doors, he knows 7 different locations that have these portals that he can open a portal from anywhere to one of those 7 doors. And so I said that when they found Parzu again and asked for his help in getting to the Patchwork Lands, he said that he could get them close, but he could not get them exactly in the Patchwork Lands because there's not a door in the Patchwork Lands. So he gave them an option. He gave them the option of going to a door that he can open in Balgrendia or a door that he can open in the Kingdom of Skulls. That was the closest he could get to the Patchwork Lands. But even that would save them a bunch of time because it would at least get them in the right part of the continent pretty quickly. So I left it up to the players to decide Balgrendia or Kingdom of Skulls. So they had to get a little bit of information on both of those. And neither place sounded great because the door in Balgrendia was in the middle of the Midnight Lands, which is the forest where the hidden kingdom of Nilfheim self-destructed in order to cast off the invasion of what's his name? The Witch King. Excuse me. And so, that was option number one. And then option number two was worse, as the door that Parzu could open in the Kingdom of Skulls was in the Dark Lady's tower, which means that they would have to contend with the Dark Lady and her minions. And after learning what the Kingdom of Skulls is all about, they really were not wanting to go there. So at this point, I had not planned on which way that they would go, because I didn't know which way they would go. If they chose Balgrendia, great. If they chose Kingdom of Skulls, great. I would love to run adventures in either location. But they chose Balgrendia. So after choosing Balgrendia, that allowed me to go ahead and figure out what adventures they would encounter as they make their way from the door in Balgrendia to the edge of the forest to the nearest village on the outskirts of Balgrendia that would enable them to take transport or to hire a guide to lead them into the Patchwork Lands. And so in Balgrendia, they exited the door, and they had a couple of sessions worth of adventures. It looks like I've already archived them. But anyway, they met up with some of the creatures that are in the Midnight Lands, and essentially had to make their way to Drago Village. Now, along the way, they found some ruins that belonged to Nox, the queen of the I forget what her title is, but she's essentially the queen of Nilfheim, and they encountered ruins that were dedicated to her, and she gave them a quest to get rid of a creature that had kind of hunkered down in her ruins, called the Goat Man. And so the Goat Man was this thing that was terrorizing the locals, and needed to be booted out at the very least, or killed, to prevent him from continuing to befoul Nox's shrine. And so they took the quest. They they were in the ruins that he was hunkered down in already. So they found him fairly quickly. They killed the Goat Man, and then she opened up a way to Drago Village. And actually, let me back up a little bit. She had actually appeared to them earlier than that, but one of the characters had offended her. I just remembered this. They had offended her. And so she basically made it so that they could not find their way out of Balgrendia. Any direction that they took just had them going in a random direction. And it was kind of like the Blair Witch Project at that point. They were just going around in circles, and they could not find their way out. So they did manage to find the ruins that were dedicated to her. She made a deal with them: get rid of the Goat Man, and I will let you leave my forest. And so they did that. She opened the way, and they made their way over to Drago Village. So once they got to Drago Village, they hired a guide, which led them to a village here in Patchwork Lands, where one of the local warlords was causing trouble. So they had to deal with that threat. But things got really dark here, as the characters were starting to feel the effects of all the things that have happened to them throughout the course of this campaign. A lot of corruption had been garnered up to this point, or acquired up to this point, I should say. And so the characters were starting to feel the weight of that, including the Clockwork, who was like the Puritan of the group. But he kind of snapped, and at one point they were talking to a villager, and the Clockwork character basically shoved his fist through the chest of the village mayor, or the figurehead, and basically because they were not cooperating in getting a guide for the players to find the occlusion. And so things really started getting kind of dark for the characters, and so that enabled that act of violence enabled the characters to get a guide, and that guide led them to the Patchwork Lands, where they found the occlusion. Once they were at the occlusion, they were able to, go into the occlusion and accomplish their quest. But before they could do that, they had to get inside. And one thing I forgot is on the way en route from here to here, there was some travel involved, and so since the Patchwork Lands are not exactly a safe place, I had them encounter a dragon along the way, and they fought the dragon, which was pretty epic. At this point, they were 7th or 8th level, and that dragon was difficulty 500, but they managed to deal with it. So I was pretty impressed with their teamwork and the abilities they had gained up to this point. So at 7th or 8th level, they're able to deal with a difficulty 500 creature. And so when they made it to the occlusion, I had to kind of up my game a little bit. But we were also running short on time. By the time they got to the occlusion, they were already at 9th level. And so for 9th level, they had to find Rathren Crux, convince him to give them access to the Black Sun manuscript, and then they had to decide whether they were going to take it or just get the information they needed from it. If they were going to take it, they were going to have to, deal with Rathren Crux and his gang. So that was a decision that they were going to have to make once they got there, but they still had to get in. So once they got to the occlusion, they found that the various warlords and all the barons and dukes and the self-proclaimed rulers of the Patchwork Lands apparently periodically have to pay tribute to the Black Sun Dawn. This is just something I made up. And so all of them were gathered around the occlusion. So there was like tents and hundreds of people all over the occlusion as they waited their turn to go in and provide Rathren Crux with a tribute. So the players had to figure out how to get in because there's this massive creature that was blocking the doorway. There was a clockwork iron titan. And these things are pretty tough, and so they didn't want to cause trouble with it, and also potentially get all these hundreds of warlords starting a fight with them. So they wanted to try to figure a way in. So the Clockwork, who had throughout the campaign, he has been slowly being recruited by an NPC that I call the Emancipator, and the Emancipator is one of the manifestations of the Cog God / Machine God. So if you know anything about the Cog God and the Machine God lore, the Cog God is like the good side, and the Machine God is like the bad side. There are two aspects to this Clockwork God, and so the Emancipator has been grooming the Clockwork character in this campaign, whose name is Meta, and for a role in an upcoming Clockwork Revolution that was was being planned, and so he basically has this Clockwork marked as one of his favored. And so when they arrived in at the occlusion, they found that there were lots of Clockwork servants that were working the camp, and so they had to figure out a way to not only get to the occlusion without starting a fight, but also to convince this big Iron Titan to let them in. So Meta goes down there and he uses his influence through the Cog God to get all of the Clockwork servants to basically start to gather around him, and they instantly recognize him because he's marked as one of the favored of the Emancipator, and so they're all like oohing and eyeing at the Emancipator's chosen, And so they use this and their influence with the Iron Titan, which is basically just a big clockwork creature, um, to get through the crowds. And then the clockwork creature is he's clockwork, but he's being controlled directly by Rathren Crux. So even though he recognized Meta as being a chosen, he was not allowed to be influenced by that. So they had to figure out a way to get into the tower. So they posed as one of the warlords that had, or the warlord that had been harassing this village that they had gone to. And so using that, they managed to talk their way into the occlusion so that they can give their tribute. So once they were in the occlusion, they started walking around. They saw that this is a huge tower. And the map that I used for this, I don't know if I still have it here. Yeah, here it is. Had 9 levels to it. So this was the map that I chose to use for the occlusion, and it had 9 levels, 3 towers, 9 levels. And that would be a lot of adventuring, which would take many sessions to go through. And so again, we had we were on a schedule here. We had to get through this fairly quickly. And so I decided that instead of going through all 9 levels, through all 3 towers, that I would have them encounter one of the disciples of Rathren Crux pretty quickly. So down on level 1 or 2, they ran into one of the disciples. I believe her name was Zula the Rapturous. So Zula the Rapturous is one that really just kind of ruined her body, but her face is beautiful. The rest of her body is just kind of like a one of those creatures from that Clive Barker movie, that has the skin peeled back and hooks and stuff like that. So anyway, she looked pretty horrible, but she she took an interest in these fellows who were obviously faking their way into the tower. And so she made them a deal. She knew that Atropos was coming, but she didn't know what Rathren Crux's plans were to help save them from the wrath of Atropos. And so she was getting kind of worried because Atropos is getting closer and closer. And since Rathren Crux has been quiet about what the plans were, she was afraid that there weren't any plans and that they would all be destroyed when Atropos arrived. So she told them that if their quest is to stop this thing, then she needs to know what is going down and how her ass is going to be saved. And so she wanted to know what Rathren Crux's plans were. And so she asked the players she would guide them up to Rathren Crux's tower. They would have to bypass his guardian, but once they do that, then they can get an audience with Rathren Crux. And once they do that, they need to find out what his plans are to make the Black Sun Dawn safe. And so they agreed to that. She got them up to the level where they could access Rathren Crux, but there is a guardian that she could not get them past. They would have to pass the guardian themselves. So when they got up to the level, they found that the guardian was a demon, a huge demon. And so they had to fight this demon. This demon was quite powerful, and it was a great fight. They managed to defeat the demon, but it was pretty close. Demons are just as a side note, as a footnote to this whole game, demons are the best monster in Shadow of the Demon Lord, which makes sense because it's in the title of the game, right? Shadow of the Demon Lord. So demons are just badasses, and they are fantastic. You can use them at low levels, and you can use them throughout your campaign. They're just fantastic opponents. This was the first demon that they had run across in this campaign, so it was a great encounter. Thoroughly enjoyed running that. So once they bypassed the demon, they made their way across over to Rathren Crux's tower. When they got in there, they managed to they found Rathren Crux. Now, Rathren Crux is bound to his throne, and he cannot talk. He's basically just sitting there. He cannot talk directly, but he uses his ring of disciples or his ring of thralls that are constantly serving him, as well as his undead mother, to tend to him and to be his voice. And so he would speak through a different disciple. Every time he spoke, a different disciple would receive that missive and would vocalize it. And so it was fun role playing Rathren Crux that way, because there would be a different disciple using a different voice, and another disciple using another voice, and another disciple whenever he responded. It was just a really kind of a cool, creepy way to convey the weirdness of Rathren Crux. And so I'm going to zoom in here so you can see what here we go. So this was the Rathren Crux tower encounter. Now they had the player characters here at this point, they were 9th level, so they were pretty tough. They could have they had many choices here. They could have attacked Rathren Crux. Now, to do that, they would have had to fight these 3 ruffians. They would have had to fight all these thralls, which the thralls were nothing. They were pretty disposable, but these guys were, they weren't pushovers. They were difficulty 50, but these guys have already defeated a couple of difficulty 500 creatures. So difficulty 50, 3 of them would not be that big a deal. That's what, 150 difficulty combined. But then Rathren Crux would be throwing spells at them as well, and he's difficulty 250. So that's 150 plus 250 is what, 500 right there? So there you go. Another 500, but there would be many more attacks coming. So the action economy was the scale was leaning more in favor of the bad guys in this encounter. I think the players kind of sensed that, because they didn't decide to fight Rathren Crux. Rather, they decided to try to talk their way through this. So there's a lot of role playing that happened here. And so Chikitinga, who is the witch of the party, he's the guy that's been kind of collecting the lore of the Black Sun manuscript, and he decided to take the lead and convince Rathren Crux that they were going to defeat Atropos, but they needed to get to the Black Sun manuscript in order to build the weapon that would enable them to do that. And so that was enough to convince Rathren Crux to give him access to the Black Sun manuscript. However, he warned Chikitinga that the Black Sun manuscript is a sentient entity in and of itself, and so it will choose whether or not Chikitinga is worthy of the information that is found within its vile pages. So Chikitinga decided to go up to the next level where the book was, and I believe I had him made some will challenge rolls to determine whether the book accepted him or not. And so he had then the choice to read the book in its entirety, or accept the offer, the counter offer that Rathren Crux had made. The counter offer that Rathren Crux had made was, instead of reviewing the Black Sun manuscript, he knew that they were coming. Rathren Crux has actually been following the progress of these player characters since they left the Lonely Vale back when they were in their early expert tier. Late novice tier, early expert tier. He had his raven creatures with the masks. They're called magpies. They had the head of a porcelain doll affixed to the body of a raven. These were his drones, basically. So they had been watching the NPCs in the Lonely Vale as potential allies to help with his plans. But when the player characters defeated the NPCs in the Lonely Vale, he had these magpies follow them around and follow their progress. And through the course of their adventures, he was convinced that they were more than capable of dealing with the Atropos threat. and that would save him from having to enact Plan B, which was to escape this world and find a new world in which him and his disciples could continue their work. But he wasn't ready for that yet, so he preferred to have the PCs stop Atropos rather than having to uproot everything that he'd built here and start over on a new planet, which was an unknown quantity for him and a risk that he wasn't willing to take at that point. So he had taken the liberty of gathering all the information from the Black Sun manuscript that the PCs were needing, and he put it all on a scroll, so that they could just take the scroll and build the weapon that they needed without having to read the manuscript. However, Chikitinga was very insistent. He wanted to look at the manuscript because he didn't trust Rather and Crux. He didn't trust that Crux was had given them that scroll to aid them rather than for his own purposes. So Chikitinga wanted to go up and review the Black Sun manuscript. So that's why he convinced him to let him look at the manuscript, and he went upstairs to do so. Once he got upstairs and he realized that the manuscript was trying to draw him in, was actually wanting him to read the contents of the book. Chikitinga really at this point had figured that he had already gained a lot of corruption. This may tip him over the edge, corruption-wise, and so he decided this may not be the time to take this kind of risk, or this level of risk. So Chikitinga then decided to back up, go back down the stairs. He told Rather and Crux he was satisfied that the information that he had provided was sufficient, and so the player characters left. So at this point, they left the tower, and I told them that they still had a few weeks before Atropos was to arrive. So they then decided to take the long way home, and we just kind of fast forwarded at this point. So I had them essentially go from the occlusion here in the Patchwork Lands to some port along the edge or the coastline here, and from there they took a ship all the way back up to Lidge. We just kind of fast forwarded through that whole thing, and once they were in Lidge, they used their considerable resources to build the weapon. Now the weapon was a series of pylons, psychic resonating pylons that they would have to build in advance, and then they would have to position once they get to Atropos. And the instructions for all of this and how to actually defeat Atropos was on the scroll that Rather and Crux had provided them. I told them how to build the stuff. They already had the materials needed to build the stuff, so they went to Lidge, they built the pylons, and then also part of their quest was to gain information that would allow Parzu access to what he referred to as the 8th door. The 8th door would actually allow Parzu to open a door pretty much to anywhere. And so the 8th door was kind of like a magical door to any place. And so Parzu told them that he would be able to transport them to Atropos, but he would not be able to get them exactly to where they need to be in Atropos because of the psychic interference that Atropos constantly emanated. He would be able to get them close onto the surface of Atropos to where they needed to be to access the interior that they need to go to in order to build or to set up the pylons to destroy Atropos. But they would have to still traverse the surface and a certain amount and access to get to the access point. So while in Lidge, they built the pylons, then they contacted Parzu. Parzu opened the 8th door and transported them to the surface of Atropos. Luckily, they had incantations for something called Ether Skin. Ether Skin is from one of the Shadow of the Demon Lord supplements, and it basically allows them to survive in the ether, which is outer space, the Shadow of the Demon Lord version of outer space. And since Atropos really didn't have much of an atmosphere or didn't have an atmosphere they could breathe, plus they would be exposed to the ether out there, then they needed this ether skin to protect them. Now, the ether skin incantation only lasted for 4 hours, so they got the ether skin, and they also had some clockwork followers of Meta who didn't need the ether skin because they're clockworks. They don't breathe, they don't eat, and so they were perfectly okay in being exposed to this the surface of this celestial body. And so Parzu opened the 8th door. The gang had their plans together. The pylons were built, and so they headed out to Atropos. And so once they got to the surface of Atropos, they were a few miles away from the access point that they needed to enter Atropos to get to the point to the place where they could set up the pylons. And so they had to traverse the surface. They knew already that the surface had was not barren. It had creatures that roamed the surface, and these creatures were really just grabbed from worlds that Atropos had already destroyed. And so these were kind of not really survivors, but more like trophies from these worlds that Atropos had kind of stolen and left to survive on the surface of on its surface. And so these creatures are roaming around, and a lot of these creatures come from oh shoot, what is that supplement? Hold on a sec. I wanted to use the Black Star supplement. Yeah, Black Star Death and Decay Creature Codex. So I wanted to use the creatures from that, and so that's what you see down here are several of the creatures from that supplement, because the creatures in that supplement are pretty alien, which I thought would be pretty appropriate for the surface of Atropos. And so we have some of the Ravagers here, and then we also had some of the larger creatures from that tome. But anyway, these creatures are all over the place. These are mobs, and so there were a bunch of mobs guarding the entrance or the access point, and so the PCs had to figure out a way to get to bypass these creatures, which there were dozens, if not 100 or so of these creatures around here, and they all look pretty tough. So they tried to map out the quickest route, and they tried to create a barrier that would separate them from some of the creatures, thereby limiting the number of creatures that they had to fight in order to get from where they were on the map, which is over here, all the way to the access point. Now, they could have gone around, but that would have meant that they would have to go in a very roundabout way. And Chikatinga actually got on his broom and flew around and saw that the entire perimeter of the entry point here was surrounded by these creatures. It's almost as if Atropos was using these creatures as just kind of a security system to prevent unwanted entry into this vulnerable spot. And so they managed to create this barrier, and they made their way into the this canyon, which provided them a means to the interior. So they go into the interior, and they make their way down, and they had to find a place where they could set up the pylons in plain view of the brain of Atropos, which was very deep in the core of the moonlet. And so they traveled quite a distance down in order to get to a place where they could actually see the brain. And now the brain was in the core, but it was far, far below them. So this is like, miles and miles below them, but the brain was enormous. The brain was like, maybe 100 miles or so in diameter. So they could see the brain, even though it was, still quite a distance away from them. All they had to do is be able to be in view of the brain in order to activate the pylon. So they got down deep enough into the core where they found this spot that had a clear view of the brain, and they started setting up these pylons. Well, Atropos had sensed their presence and sensed them to be a threat, so it created, and I don't have one out here, but it created a defense out of its, out of its stuff, and so this may look familiar if I can find it here real quick. The aspect of Atropos basically formed out of the stuff of Atropos, and so this was a let's see, what was, it's it was another difficulty 500 creature, but the thing with this creature is once you defeat it, another one would pop up. And so they were limited in time, and then the aspect of Atropos would not only attack them, but would also attack the pylons. And so they had to set up 4 of these pylons and activate them in order to set up the psychic interference that would cause the brain of Atropos to lose its grip on this realm and force it back into the void. And so while they were setting up these pylons, this huge aspect of Atropos, which was a legendary creature, or an epic creature, I should say, not legendary, that's D&D. This was an epic creature, which means it had multiple attacks and multiple resistances. They had to fight it. So they pulled all their resources. They managed to fight off this horrible monster and set up the pylons. And once the pylons were set up, Atropos started losing his hold on this planetoid, and so they had to make their way out quickly. So they made their way out quickly. One funny thing was with Chikitinga. Way back when they were in the Patchwork Lands and they fought that dragon, they actually didn't kill the dragon. They had defeated the dragon because Chikitinga used the toad spell to change the dragon into a toad. And so he was carrying this dragon slash toad, this toad slash dragon, in his pouch with him, waiting for a good opportunity to unleash him as a dragon grenade. And so this was the point where he unleashed the dragon grenade. He was always skeptical about it because he was afraid the dragon might turn on them, because he didn't control the dragon. Once it was a dragon again, it was a dragon. But he thought that this would be a good time. So the dragon would maybe hold off the aspect of Atropos while they escaped. So he threw the dragon toad out, turned into a dragon. The dragon looked around and said, "Where the hell am I? I'm getting out of Dodge. I'm getting the hell out of here." So the dragon started flying up and got the hell out. So that was kind of a funny scene. Kind of wondering how that dragon would be utilized by the end of the campaign, and that's how it was. So anyway, they managed their way out. It was very cinematic. The world was falling apart around them, and they had to climb their way out. And they made it to the surface where Parzu was waiting for them so he could open the 8th door again and get them back to Earth. So they all managed to get back to Earth, back to Lidge, and revel in their victory. They watched in the early morning sky as the world of Atropos disintegrated up in the heavens, and the threat had come to an end. However, I also had just kind of a little seed planted for a future campaign, in that as the world of Atropos disintegrated, a black residue remained in the place where Atropos was, and this black residue was slowly making its way across the heavens towards the glowing orb of the sun that warms this world of Earth. And that plants the seed for the Black Sun Demonic Shadow event that will be a future problem for these intrepid adventurers to, or the intrepid players to deal with. But that is for a future campaign. So that is it, ladies and gentlemen of the realms. I finished yet another campaign. So this was my 5th Shadow Demon Lord campaign that I have completed. I love this game. I love running it. I love how easy it is to run a campaign, how quickly I can get through a campaign, and still have it be satisfying. Now, this campaign started in early 2022, so it took me pretty much the rest of 2022. I'm going to say about 9 months. It took me about 9 months to get through this campaign in total, but it was great, well worth it. Very interesting characters that were created. There's also another lingering plot line with Meta and the Clockwork Revolution that has been built or building. And so that may be the focus of the next campaign, or I may handle that offline. I'm not really sure. The other campaign plot line with the war between the orcs and the Empire, or the orcs of the Empire, and the Church of the New God, is also starting to come to a head. So that, some of those things will need to be resolved pretty quickly, and again, probably not for another campaign or two. But this is another great thing about the campaigns I've been running. All 5 of my campaigns are interconnected. So on my campaign timeline, the first campaign, which was the Tales of the Demon Lord, basically kicked off the apocalypse for the world. And there's been a shadow event happening with each one of these campaigns. And, the player characters have been able to stave off the end of the world for each of these shadow events. But each of the shadow events has left its mark on the world. So as these shadow events occur, horrible things are happening in the world. I forgot to mention earlier that as the player characters finished in the occlusion and they were traveling back, meteor showers were just peppering the world with meteors from Atropos, and all these meteors were mutating people all over the place. And so now the world has a bunch of irradiated areas with mutants, and that's yet another blight that has been brought to this world that will continue it in its path towards oblivion for future campaigns. And so I just love the progression, and I love that this game setting and that this game system enables me to run this mega campaign. I just love it, and I hope that it keeps going for many years to come. So with that, I will go ahead and wrap up this video here. Thanks for watching, and hail to the Demon Lord. How do I turn this damn thing off?